is probably the most difficult week of lockdown as redundancies start. The UK yesterday announced that government debt is now higher than the economy at £1.95 trillion, which is obviously the worst since 1963. But it's still better than it was post-war when we were at 258% of GDP and 1946-47. It is expected by October we're going to see 4 million people on the unemployment register, which is obviously a concern. So there's obviously quite a lot of work to be done in terms of rebuilding. So I suppose the question we need to start, this is when I think the harsh realities of lockdown is probably going to start coming to hit us now. And it's going to get, obviously, as I keep saying, we've gone through a kind of whole safe period where people have been relatively relaxed. And suddenly it's going to turn to much more an anxious, stressful time, I think, as this kind of moves forward. So how do we think this is going to impact? A whole lot of technology is obviously going to be, our view is going to really break out, which is going to change working patterns. So there's quite a number of organizations talking about people doing 2 to 3 jobs working from home. Do we think that is a reality? Will we see, how do you believe we're going to see the market rebuild? I'm interested in looking at. Will we see changes in work patterns? And will we see more entrepreneurs come onto the marketplace? And Damien probably has some views on this as he begins to launch his own business. Will we see a whole range of more innovation come on? As actually, particularly a lot of the young who have been made redundant are the ones probably with a lot of hunger to create some change. So this is probably, we're getting to what I call the business end of the lockdown, when it all gets a whole much more serious, I think it's fair to say. So what changes do we think we're going to see? We hosted a couple of forums this week, and actually, I think it's fair to say that the overall view is that probably 50% of restaurants in the marketplace will depart scene, is the general view. Will close doors forever. So that's going to leave a big hole in the high street. So what are your views on that? A report came out this week which estimated over £100 billion of lost sales in restaurants have been lost since March, globally. That's obviously a huge amount that's going to be recouped. I think the overall view is going to take until the end of the year for hotels really get back to break-even mark. So that's going to be a long journey. And obviously, in terms of the food service sector, a lot of those models are going to change as well. So we've obviously, but going to next year, the good news is there does seem to be the view there will be a bounce. And actually we'll see a 7 to 8% rise in GDP, which actually is quite promising. So the real challenge is how do we get to the next 6 months? But also how do we help the young who are going to be taking, I think, the brunt of this tidal wave? And how are things going to change in the marketplace as well? So quite a lot of different issues to start with. Just to be really depressing to start with, but let's try and get onto a positive note as we go. Gary, I'm going to start with you if you're okay with that, because obviously in the recruitment you'll probably start seeing things, particularly from the hard edge of things. Your views, your take on what's going to be happening?
Yeah, I mean, I agree completely with you. I mean, I've made a point of getting around speaking to clients over the last sort of couple of weeks, more in particular this week. Yeah, I think if you look at the various markets, I'm not sure if we'll see a 50% cut in the restaurant market, but I think at least a third. I think we are, I mean, this week I have really started to see a tsunami of CVs come through of all levels. People you wouldn't normally expect to be on the market. Those CVs are coming through from all sectors, coming through food service, that they started coming through this week. The hotel ones have been coming through for a couple of weeks, and that came up, and restaurants as well. So right across the board, we're, you know, I'm certainly seeing, you know, a whole, a wide selection of CVs from all levels coming through. I think it's going to be a tough few months ahead. I think we will hit the bottom of this round about sort of August. The next couple of months are going to be very tough. We will see a very slight trickle of jobs possibly between September and November. I think the temporary market and the interim market may see a little bit of a bounce if the social distancing are relaxed. One thing I do know, speaking to a lot of clients, a lot of candidates, is a lot of Europeans that have gone home aren't planning to come back. And whereas they originally sort of left certainly for London, left London when this all started. The companies are now contacting them to say, right, we're looking to bring you back. And these are across all sectors from sort of July, August time. They're saying, well, actually, I'm not coming back. So we're starting to see that as well. So I do think that there will be, certainly from a people perspective, next year there will be a bounce back. I think it'll start from sort of February, March and gather pace a little. And I think from the spring next year, then we will start to see, the skill shortages coming back again. But it's really getting, as Chris said, between sort of July, August through to March, April of next year.
So it's about an 8-month period, do you think we've got to get through?
I think it's going to be a very tough 5-6 months ahead, and then it'll be a battle right up into the second quarter of 2021 is when I really see, the beginning of the second quarter of 2021, when I see things starting to come back properly.
Gary, up in Scotland, you must have been a bit disheartened by the delay of reopening again.
Yeah, there's lots of disappointed bars and restaurants, certainly. But at the same time, quite a lot of calls yesterday where people were agreeing, if we're not ready, we're not ready. For the sake of another 2 weeks, let's get the evidence. And there's a big move from the Scottish government that they feel that these cautious approach, when they do come out and say, right, we're ready to go back out into the out the lockdown, the public will feel more confident because the government have waited rather than just, they do feel at the moment that there's a gung-ho approach from Boris. Just get it open, get it open. It was interesting, a couple of points what Gary was saying about the Europeans going back home. We've been picking up as independents for the last probably 2 or 3 years, a lot of European staff moving from independent operators back to the corporate operators. So they've got a route back into Europe. That was all around the Brexit stuff. But we noticeably found that chambermaids, restaurant staff were leaving us to go into the corporate hotels, just so they had a route back. And secondly, I was talking to my accountant yesterday, 30 to 40 staff, average age about 30 to 50. And they've done 2 weekly surveys with all the team who are obviously doing home working at the moment. Productivity is high. Certainly, they've got no concerns about people Skyping, and there is no wish from the workforce to return anytime soon to the working environment. Now, I've got to say they're in a complete open plan office. There's no massive room for them to spread out social distancing. But what the director was saying was their main concern when they're asking why do you feel uncomfortable coming back is public transport. They have no confidence in public transport and the social distancing on there at all, which again is very interesting now that the First Minister is making it mandatory of face masks having to be worn from next week on all public transport. So there's obviously a shift to try and grow confidence in the public transport network. But we've had that discussion before, and I was part of a network forum with the MD of ScotRail, and they by far absolutely understand that their capacity is absolutely minimum, between 10 and 20% by abiding by the 2 meter rule. So if you imagine 10 to 20% on our rail service, it's just not achievable to get our workforce around the country. So very, very challenged. But I do feel, certainly in the last 24 hours, the contacts that I've had is, well, fine, it's not ideal what Nicola's come out with, but if it takes another 2 weeks, so be it. We'll wait another 2 weeks.
This 2 meter rule is causing quite a lot of controversy, isn't it? Because there's a lot of debate down south that actually there's no science to back it up.
Yeah, and that's filtering out up here. However, there's also quite a lot of chat around some of the guidance that's coming out on the protect and test and protect and everything, is that the 2 meter rule you need to be within 15 minutes within the distance connection with somebody within 15 minutes. The 1 meter is 1 minute, and that's concerning people. That is concerning people. You know, forget about, oh well, it's only a meter, which obviously is some of our other people. I think it was Kenny from Buzzworks was saying, you know, people just disregard it anyway. Whether it's 2 meters, they'll abide by the meter. Whether it's a meter, they'll go down to, you know, a couple of feet. But effectively, there is certainly a concern up here, albeit, as I've reported many times, you know, you walk around Glasgow and there's still an awful lot of people that don't abide by it. We were in the park again yesterday afternoon, and there's still groups out there of 20 and 30 people on the park, and there's no way they're social distancing to 2 meters or a meter. And of course, I think we all agree, ultimately, we need to get away from that distance. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen until we get a vaccine, because you know, there's that risk. And Nicola Sturgeon said again yesterday, the risk is a spike, and that to the economy is just doesn't even bear thinking about what we would do if we went back into the lockdown and how the economy would fare. It would be damaged for, you couldn't even estimate what would happen. You know? So she's clearly strong in her convictions, and she was battered yesterday from some people, and she was resolute. You know, this is the evidence. This is where we're standing. I'm looking after the safety and the health of the Scottish nation. So,
Hamish, can I bring you in here?
Yeah, lots.
Because obviously this
to think about.
Yeah, sorry, this whole thing about the meter rule is going to affect on aviation, particularly, isn't it? And what?
Yeah, as I've said previously on these calls, the biggest challenge at the moment for the aviation sector would appear to be the quarantines in various countries around the world. And until you get some clarity on what's going to happen with regard
I think we lost you, Hamish, there for a second. What? Hamish, we've lost you. Warren, your views. Can I ask? Are you obviously back in central London now, I'm assuming, are you?
Part-time. Yeah, we start in, which has been keeping me very busy, so my apologies for not being on many calls recently. But yeah, I've been going to the clubhouse now every twice a week, and ramping up to open officially. We've now set a date, 3rd of August. Is the plan, with the thought process that we've got close to about 900 members in and around London, actually, who may or may not wish to come into the clubhouse during that time. So we are fortunate enough to have a bit of a captive audience, to be fair, not completely rely on the international market and that as well. But of course, yeah, from a staffing point of view, it's concerning, because you've got, we of course also have redundancies, discussions, with our senior team and trying to see how we are going to pursue that. But at the moment, fortunately, we still have the full team from before lockdown, still being paid full salaries at the moment. We're very fortunate to be able to do that. But in the next couple of months, I don't see how that's going to be possible. But we've also done a survey, and there's a couple of our staff members who've said that they're quite happy to reduce to 4 days a week working, and they would be quite happy to do that because they also get flexibility, which I think they didn't think they would be able to get if they'd asked previously. So there's a couple of positives with that, and I think hopefully we can try and find some balances in that way. But equally, what we actually now doing is we completely re-looking at the structure within the clubhouse in terms of staffing and responsibilities and job descriptions, and starting to go, well, how can we train staff in the F&B that isn't ordinarily their background? Certainly trying to look at combining the reservations team, the sales and the membership teams all together as one department, possibly, which will also again allow, I suppose, being able to keep a few more staff on potentially as well. But it's definitely a very big challenge, and I know I've saw a letter which I think a couple of other clubhouses have sent out, and the vast majority of them are looking to reduce their staff by about 40% across the board, which, especially if you've got banqueting and events, that's inevitable, sadly. So we don't quite know, but I'm taking a optimistic view. that things will bounce back sooner than later, in my mind. And I'm just hoping we can find new roles and new kind of ways that staff could work that could help facilitate a different type of service to our members. So.
No, look, one of the conversations we're finding is happening all the time is how can you use event space differently?
Well, yeah, I'm really tackling. I mean, again, we're quite fortunate because we've got quite big space within the clubhouse. So I'm converting one of them, which ordinarily we can do about 120 banqueting style seating, and I'll be turning that into a members' lounge as an extension to the other ones, with kind of basic coffee service and drinks and that from the space outside. With obviously screens and all that to protect members and disposable cups and etc. So, because also the other thing we're looking at is we've got very close ties to the Commonwealth, and have done as part of our kind of founding values. And, there's almost 100 Commonwealth businesses within London alone, who have got little offices all around London, and they basically, like many, are going to just close up their leases and potentially look at working from home. But what we are looking at possibly doing instead is actually converting a couple of our bedrooms into offices, and then use the big restaurant we have downstairs, which currently we only use for breakfast anyway, and turn that into a co-working space where we can then become that Commonwealth hub potentially within London, and they can use us as an office, and hopefully we can grow the business that way. So we are quite optimistic. Yeah,
I think that's a very logical thing to do, isn't it? To use clubs that way as well.
Well, I think so. I think clubs are in a much better position than a lot, and hotels arguably as well. I mean, they've got banqueting space which they could probably turn into a similar type of setup, and I think that would probably attract quite a lot of corporates as and when they are able to come in safely back into London. But I think the business model is going to change terribly, massively, especially in hospitality. And I know there's quite a few apartments blocks that have got business floors, as it were, that are starting to sprout out, which is not a new thing, but it's been coming more and more. And I think that might come out of this as well. And hopefully a lot of the corporate space will turn into bedrooms, but retain, as I say, a shared working space where people can still work safely, and but at the same time come and base themselves in London, for example, for a week if they need to. So but that's how I think it's going to change. Yeah.
Look, Paula, obviously you're doing a lot of work in restaurants. This 2 metre, 1 metre thing is a real concern, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think the difference in terms of 1 metre versus 2 metre for the recovery of restaurants is obviously really massive, and I think there is a sort of waiting with bated breath a little bit in terms of what the government's going to announce in relation to that, because I think it will have a massive impact on the ability for restaurants to recover, especially probably more of the small independents. I think your stat of 50% is just so stark, and I really hope that's not the case, and that a lot more, hopefully, if there's a bigger, I suppose, demand at the beginning. They talk about this sort of V, and there being people really missing, I suppose, the sense of being able to go to their favourite brands, restaurants, eating out, just craving a bit of normality. But obviously there are still some key challenges to get over, such as transport into cities. I know that probably is still something that needs a bit more confidence built in it, a bit more reassurance. I don't know, sometimes there's a bit of a narrative needed as well from the government in terms of helping to create a much more positive sense of, people feeling okay, because there is a large majority of people that are probably less at risk from the virus, and maybe the way it's communicated and how that's I suppose shared more openly, I think might give people more confidence, because it's not, there is obviously, it's devastating, and people that have been massively affected by it. I'm not trying to play it down, but there is a large proportion of society that probably would not be as impacted as the vulnerable, whether it's your age bracket, underlying health issues. So, trying to, I suppose, just help with some positive narrative in terms of those messages. But there's, I suppose, just so much in play, really. Creativity, I think the thing Warren was saying about thinking differently, I think that's an absolute, that's a must, and it's really been very good to see businesses having been able to unleash a lot more creativity. I think maybe this has, I think I heard one CEO talking and it really made me smile. He talked about all of them lining up all of their sacred cows and shooting them. And I think sometimes there's something about, you know, businesses end up with myths, legends, all these things that almost get in the way of just a great idea and getting it done. And I think what this has done, if there was a positive, is it's taken away those barriers and it's made innovation and creativity and that very entrepreneurial sort of spirit come to the fore, and I think that's been really great to see. So,
and one of the trends we're seeing, and it ties into what Gary was saying earlier, there is a general view beginning to emerge that we're not getting enough advice from government, but it seems to be losing slight control on the science, which I understand is the difficulty, because you've probably got scientists from the public sector advising people in the commercial sector who have different sets of pressures. But we do need to get a greater clarity on this 2 metre, 1 metre and what we can do, because otherwise, if we don't get down a proper plan in place, it's going to be very hard for people, isn't it?
No, definitely. Scotland did really well because they just published some guidance, I think it was yesterday, for hospitality and tourism. And so they sort of feel like they're ahead of it in relation to clarity, at least providing some clarity for hospitality businesses, albeit they've pushed the day. I don't think there is any clarity or enough clarity in the UK, and it would be great to, I suppose, for people to have that so they can plan and have the best possible chance of having a positive outcome and being able to get through the next 6-8 months or so, where it's going to be very, very challenging.
Thank you. Michael, your views on this?
Yeah, first of all, some good news. I was on invited to a Zoom call yesterday for Scotland, and I'd sat in on the morning at a STR update call. I don't know if anyone else saw that, but there was a very interesting chart there, and it showed business on the books for large city hotels were running round about 20% or less. As you moved out of the big cities into the more country and then rural destinations, those business on the book occupancies went up, first of all, from 20 to 40. And in the real leisure rural destinations, business on the books, they were reporting was 60%, which was, you know, quite a shock. So it was good news, really, for those Scottish hoteliers. I think mostly they were in the Highlands. Although one pointed out that Nicola Sturgeon is only allowing people to drive 5 kilometres, which would have to be changed. So that was a bit of good news. And for the rest of the country, that this pent-up demand for the people that want to go out, and I accept there's still too high a percentage, I think it's about 40%, 40-50% who are still feeling vulnerable to go out. So there's, on one hand, you've got the huge people that will get out with the protests and get into the parks and everything, but on the other hand, you've got people who are very vulnerable. So you've got this balance. So I was on the call actually wearing my EMMA hat, the European Hotel Managers Association, and I wanted to seek the views of our European hoteliers, especially as sickeningly. There was a EU tourism forum, I think this week or last week, and the UK did not attend. I mean, I thought we were still in the EU until the end of the year, but they didn't attend. You know, how narrow-minded is that of our government? So I'm telling everyone, well, EMMA is the EU for the hospitality industry, because we are very well connected, you know, right across all the European countries. So I took a straw poll. I went to Austria, Spain, the Netherlands, and France, and just gave them a list of about 10 questions, bullet point answers. And the first question is, what is your meter rule? Austria is 1 meter, and all the rest are 1.5 meters, which were, oh, interesting enough, talk about confusion, between France and Monaco, I can't remember which way around. One of them is 1.5 meters and one of them is 1 meter. So there's a challenge for you when you live just across the border in Monaco. But the meter rule seems to be very well accepted over there. So you've got a good experience to be drawing from, because those hotels, Netherlands, I think, opened about a couple of weeks ago. And I asked them the various questions: how are you handling it? What are you doing with your rooms? And most of them are leaving 24 to 72 hours between lettings of rooms, lots of deep cleaning, lots of removal of all extraneous items from the room, lots of signage, etc. All the things we've been reading about, but they're sort of, they're getting on with it. I can't see this 2 meter can survive, quite honestly. I know we're all cautious, but I think with all the examples we've got across the channel here, and all the way through to the Eastern Bloc countries, you know, who are all, nobody's on 2 meters. So I think that's good. Going back to redundancies, I really feel we're at such a critical area. Those figures, Chris, of 4 million unemployed, I mean, it is going to get sort of somewhere near there. I just feel, I feel so much for these, you know, these people. I'm seeing it sort of firsthand from a family member who's in a consultation period for redundancy for a London hotel. And frankly, I'm pretty shocked what I'm seeing, you know, the lack of care and empathy that's going on. And I heard a wonderful quote from a retired brigadier who used this situation. He was running the Edinburgh Tattoo. He's just stepped down. I'm sure some of you may know him. But he used this analogy of, you know, when you're in war, in a situation, and he used the words, "We take our casualties with us." Now, they obviously pick up the casualties, the wounded, and they do take them with us. They don't leave them there. And I think that's what we're in at the moment, that companies that are having to make people redundant have got to somehow emotionally take their casualties with them, and just be aware when they're making people redundant to do it in the softest possible way, and perhaps leaving lifelines or paths of assistance to help them over this sort of period when they're going to be out of work. However, I'm making a list now of people I know who contacted me who've been made redundant, and these are good people. So for hotels that are opening, these are great opportunities to, especially what Gary was saying earlier, that a lot of the overseas people are not coming back. So initially, there's going to be for the opening hotels, you know, they will really have the pick. And I spoke to one opening hotel who said they've just had applications from a chief steward on an airline, normally paid £45,000 a year, and he was asking for, he was applying for a job for £20,000 a year. So there will be, I think, a lot of people out there, and I think we've just got to somehow corral them, you know, keep on to them, and for when the recovery will come, and then we'll want them, and we want to make sure that you know, they're going to be there. But meanwhile, we've got to take our casualties with them, look after them as much as we can, even from afar, in the hope of bringing them back.
Fair words. Mariana, I'm sure you agree on a lot of what Michael's saying there, don't you?
Yes, definitely. I've agreed with what was previously said about the countryside hotels getting so much faster rebound. The smaller the places, a lot of about pickup in room service as one of the options to sort of keep the guests feeling safe. A lot was said about how do we balance the number of people that are out there on the market, not only engage them, but balance them. And I've seen some social media posts and some kind of collective put together sites, new accounts that didn't exist before, that featured these people that were made redundant, which I thought was really great. And you know, when you get an Instagram post with a profile of a person who was just made redundant and little description, what their favorites are, how they shined in their previous jobs. So it increases their visibility as a person. It shares their reputation, shares their skills and qualities. And this has been done actually by a group of students. I've just spoken to my mentee, and her brain is spinning. She's, you know, 19 years old, 20 years old actually. And she doesn't know what's next. As much as she wants to throw herself into studies, they're also, you know, used to working in hospitality through the summer. And they are creating small groups that are sort of working on innovative ideas that they can actually pass along to the industry leaders, and to just sort of get engaged, even though they're not getting paid for it. They don't expect anything. They just want to be there to help with the brainstorming and to help to move that thinking different way for the next, we're talking about 6 to 8 months, right? Before we find the truth and we have more facts, and this will become part of our life. And when we get used to whether there is going to be second spike or not, we just have to wait and see. But the most important part, I think, is how and what do we do, exactly like you said, the next to 8 months. A couple of my chefs that I know started creating chef clubs, knowing that there's that vulnerable portion of the residents, let's say 60 and above, that just refuse to go out. Again, they'd be feeling safe when they're in a restaurant, is how to get to the restaurant, how to avoid the transport, how to trust what's going to happen, because nobody has the answers and facts. They don't know how many people will be at any train station. So these chefs are creating a little chef club. And we were actually told, I was helping them to put the model together and how they can digitally promote without doing, you know, all 9 yards, like a website and everything else, just selling the brands. You know, maybe a sous chef of Balthazar can come and cook a branded Balthazar dinner at the house of, you know, some elderly people that just really are very reluctant to leave their houses. You know, by the time the restaurant figures out whether they're going to open or not, by the time the investors and shareholders and whoever figure out how much money they're going to lose, these guys are keeping themselves productive. They're organizing events in the parks where they cook out. They keep their personalities and their passion kind of going, and they communicate it out there. So these chefs are going to be going to some of the houses, and which is great, because I feel that 30%, they could get a nice 30% of population, I'd say, that would love to have a branded, beautiful dinner and treat themselves within the safety of their safe zone, of their household. Maybe have a couple of friends come in. Maybe it's a dinner for 6, but they know the people, or they're maybe the neighbors, maybe someone they've been interacting with. So this is, I think, these are the small ideas that might just really, really hold us up above the ground for the next 6 to 8 months, until we just have more facts, because we just don't have the facts.
I mean, that's part of the problem. As someone said yesterday, everyone's making decisions based on no facts at the moment.
And there is a lot of risk taking, same as with these countries and their borders opening and whatnot. A lot of people actually, you know, I have friends that have business in Croatia. They spent 5 months, a year there. They went not having any clue what's going to happen, and blown up their bouncing castle on the shore. Locals were saying, no, don't worry, you come, you know, there's going to be tourists. Of course, this has been the first week. There's 3 people at the whole beach. But they don't know what's going to happen, because there's no quarantine, there's no social distancing, there's nothing. So I think the government there made that decision knowing that there's risks, and people know that if you go for 2-3 weeks, you may be risking getting the virus and being there treated. But going back to your country without quarantine and whatnot, the things that worry people the most is that they don't know if it will change. So I don't know if I'll go for vacation and within 2 weeks they don't shut down the borders again because there will be a spike. So I think with the restaurants and hotels, you know, you can wait and see, but you can still do those tiny little steps and tiny little engagement parts to remain your existence. and remain the engagement of society. I mean, if we're all going to stay and sit home scared, we're never going to rebound from this. So something has to keep going.
Damien, let's bring you in at this point, because Damien's just literally launching his own business with a new product, which is all about how people can order safely. Is that fair, Damien?
It is, yeah. I mean, the idea of Thirsty was long before the current situation with COVID. I mean, we were 4 guys that experienced business guys that would either be used to hosting a hospitality table at an event or attending a hospitality event. And the idea of Thirsty came about when we would run out of a drink on the table. The table runner was nowhere to be seen, and you look at the bar and it's about 4 deep at that time, and you're thinking, right, okay, I can't really be bothered to queue on that side of things. And it was like, how can we get that? How can we benefit the customer and the venue? And so Thirsty was born from that idea. And then as we've taken it further and further, I mean, the latter part of last year was when the development started, really. And we've evolved it now, because people we were speaking to at the time, industry experts, etc., were saying, well, okay, it'd be great. That's a great idea, but it would be even better if we can add room service and more versatility to it. And we said, that's fine. That's brilliant feedback. We'll do that. And so, yeah, we've come up with Thirsty, which provides it's a web-based application that is instantly accessible via one's smartphone. So if they scan the QR code in the room or on the table, it instantly provides digital menu for food and drinks. You can do the cross-sell side of things as well, the upsell, and you can you have featured areas where you can push premium products to help grow revenues, etc. So in a way, I suppose the COVID situation, as tragic as it is, it's forcing people to move 5 years forward in 3 months. Obviously, Thirsty would like to be part of that, working with the industry, working with hotels, restaurants, cafes, bars, etc., in providing that safe, stable.
Are you finding people are focusing on room service more? Because I think that's part of it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That's Mariana's point.
Yeah, absolutely. At the moment, the room service is where people are leaning on, because that's the safest way to be able to deal with the social distancing for the delivery of food within hotels at the moment. Until more information is known, certainly the focus around room service is high.
That's interesting. Dean, you're seeing, sorry, Michael, quickly. Michael,
no, every European hotel I spoke to is featuring room service. They deliver to the door. The waiter stands back. They either put it on the tray on a trolley, and then the guest takes it in the room. They're all featuring that, so people can feel more comfortable. And another one, I watched a presentation from Park Plaza Hotels in the UK, who've done an excellent video for their staff on how to cope with the whole situation, and also an excellent consumer video which is on their website. And they've done a really great job in advising all the guests coming in what to expect, and training their staff on all aspects. And a big feature again is room service. Sorry.
Sorry, no, not at all. Dean, how are you finding? Because obviously, delivered model has I suppose, is going to increase in popularity. The view is because you give more flexibility than the traditional models. How are you finding things?
Yeah, I mean, one contract is traditional, is no more. But that's been shelved, mainly because the client itself is struggling. And every time we look to the operation and try and restart it in some shape or form, because of the nature of how it's set up, you wouldn't be able to operate it safely. So we've kind of pulled away from that. And like the restaurant scene, even though we are in delivery, which is peaking, we still find ourselves not immune to redundancies. So, I think listening to friends and family that are in the hotels, restaurants, it's a real struggle. What's really nice, actually, and kudos to EP, I find these quite a nice format to get together and share information. And again, I think that's been great. Picking up on a few things that have sort of gone round, and what Gary was saying, recruitment, what I'm seeing in recruitment is that the titles and renaming of things. So a lot of the guys are in events, whilst I think it feels like they're on a cliff edge at the moment. I think a lot of those event guys, and that's what we'll be looking for, will be moving into delivery. And some of the titles will have delivery in now. I think one of the recruiters has changed theirs from event recruiting to delivery recruitment. So there's a thing that's changing. As a business, we've gone through lots of changes in order to get back. And what we're actually working on now, which probably some people are talking about, but we're going to get working on it now, is that whatever happens in the future, we're the second wave, the second peak, whatever it is. Maybe there's a third, maybe there's a fourth. Can your business come back from that? And actually, when you look at it like that, as dark as it is, I think you have to kind of build with that in your mindset. So that's going to change. It's changing for us. It's changing for a lot of people. And then just picking up on what Warren was saying, it is quite interesting. Obviously, this isn't for everybody, and it depends on your location. But a lot of the city, we look after a lot of tech clients, and they're already talking about like what WeWork are doing by incorporating bedrooms and kind of overnight stay situations. So there's a market there that wasn't there before. So you almost like a concierge hotel accommodation. And I think if, we don't do accommodation, but I'm sure in the future, you'll see collaborations from former hotels, branded hotels, actually able to run some of these office suites accommodations for corporate clients, because they do it very well. And I think, again, as dark as the times are now, I think as long as everyone's open and flexible and just looks at it as a restart and don't try to carry any baggage with you, as hard as it is, just see it as a new opportunity. And that's what I'm seeing from where I am at the moment. So it is very different for everyone. And again, we were talking on a workshop this week with some clients globally. And I think when you're talking, you have to remind yourself that where they're sat and what they're looking at is very different to anyone else. Scotland, Wales, France, Italy, there's all these different restrictions, different, New Zealand are all running around and we're all kind of wishing we were living there at the moment. But, I think you have to respect that. So that's my point of view anyway.
Thanks, Dean. Ramesh, bring you in at this point. In terms of the legal profession, because the legal profession must be under quite a lot of pressure as well, isn't it? Facing the same type of challenges in different ways.
Yes, but I think we've already gone through this phase where we got a lot of people working 4 days a week, reduced salaries, and this week has been dreadful because there's a lot of anger in terms of redundancies, a lot of people feeling bitter, and I think there's been absolutely no empathy. And firms actually using partners who are like Rottweilers to sort of actually address people one-to-one and really almost saying to them, this is a private conversation, don't repeat it. And I think a lot of the anger is coming out. But I think overall, Chris, can I just touch on something that Paula said, which is this about the government coming out with positive statements. I think more than positive, I think it'd be nice to have an honest and consistent narrative. At least you had that in Scotland, and in the UK, seems a complete lack of leadership. Boris looks dreadful and makes decisions on the hoof, and then that the U-turns every day. The big thing about this Trace and Track app, which was meant to be world beating, has now gone out of the window. But I worry about something else that's happening, which is that if you listen to radio stations and you watch TV, people are not discussing this virus. They're discussing a different sort of thing, which is the Black Lives Matter and this whole thing. There's almost like a truth and reconciliation thing going on. And I think there's a lot of anger coming out from both sides. And I worry that a lot of people, whether they come out on marches or elsewhere, I think there's so much anger coming out from both sides. And I think the government sort of not taking hold of it and saying, look, let's try and deal with this. And even on any aspect, I mean, to have a quarantine rule about people coming here 4 months after it should have been done, and then saying we're going to do it. And then I think the biggest problem I see is that 3 months from now, if they still maintain that we will leave Europe without a deal, I think it's just going to add to the pain. So I think people, the trouble is that, as you say, the hospitality industry, any industry, the legal industry, they're making decisions, hoping they're the right decisions because there's nothing else to go on.
So you don't think the government's in control?
I don't think it's been in control for a while. And I think we used to think Boris was great and maybe he had a second-rate cabinet which would listen to him on everything. But now it seems like they're all in the same basket, and there's no consistency. I mean, you look at education, and the education secretary, in my opinion, has gone to sleep, has been asleep for a while, and there's so many issues there. I do despair. I do despair because I think I suppose one of the worse than the virus. I'm sorry, but that's my feeling. But in terms of hotels as well, I mean, I've been advising a client this week, and apart from dealing with the redundancies, Michael, they've also been having to sit in meetings with the bank because the whole issue of loan covenants and how you change those covenants over the next year or so, when the business isn't there and the foreign when there won't be any foreign travel in terms of inward travel. So I mean, the banks are not being easy either. So it's I'm sorry, I've had a bad week in terms of sort of looking at all these things. Normally, I'm quite positive.
Right. But I guess one of the challenges for the government is they've painted themselves slightly into a hole because they've said they're going to follow the science, and the science isn't there yet, and yet the commerciality is getting worse with each passing day. So it becomes a pressure cooker, doesn't it?
No, but then the scientists who were on the committee, once they resign, then they come out with their own sort of thinking. And
doesn't help either.
Predict what the government's doing. So it's that leaves the audience even more confused. At least Nicola Sturgeon has been consistent. Yeah. Hamish, maybe I should move to Scotland.
Hamish, we'll bring you back in. Glad you managed to rejoin us.
Yeah, sorry, some IT challenges this morning.
Don't worry.
Look, from a travel perspective, I think there's been lots of points that have been touched on this morning, but quite clearly the government policy on quarantines and lack of direction about what's going to happen with regards to flying is really going to limit what happens with regards to aviation in the short term. And the airlines are saying to us that until the quarantines get lifted, there'll be no meaningful travel anywhere at this particular point in time. So that's a challenge for us going forward. And I totally agree with Ramesh that I think the government is lacking, decision-making capability and giving people some clear guidance on what's going to happen. If they said the quarantine was going to be in for 6 weeks, at least people can plan. But to remobilise the airline industry, it's not going to happen in days or potentially even weeks. And I think we are suggesting, that I heard you sort of say that, you thought things would be back to break even by the end of the year. I think we're suggesting that, at this point, the direction we've got is if we could get to break even for 21-22, that would be a fantastic effort from an airline travel perspective. And that's how long we're looking. We're not seeing any profit in the business for at least 2 more years as we sit here today. We've gone through a sort of a 40% downsizing of our business over the last 3 or 4 weeks. So we're at the end of that now, and people are starting to leave our business. And I think listening to people here, I mean, I've got to say, I think we've done it very well, and we have made sure that we, and continue to support people right through. We've given everybody who's leaving our business a laptop and a phone so that they can, continue to, look after the job. We've got, job forums going on we've engaged consultants to help everybody with their CV and, a personal profile review so that they can, sell the benefits of themselves in the job market. And we're actively working with recruiters to try and make sure that, they know that we've got some people who are great people moving forward. So I'm encouraged by some of that stuff. And I am encouraged as well that I see a huge amount of pent-up demand for, travel and or, just retail. In Windsor this week and where I've been, there's been lots of people out in the streets. What I'm more concerned about is I'm surprised that every shop's not open. And there's people that are saying, oh, we're going to open in August. I'm sort of like, that worries me more because there seems to be an apathy or an acceptance that this is just the way we are at the moment. And you've got to get back into the game and start advertising and making sure you're continuing to sell. Otherwise we are doomed, in the short and maybe medium term. We've got to get people out on the streets, buying, getting back into society.
It goes back to Michael's point. My worry, actually getting people out again, I think everyone has a thirst to get out. I think it's getting them back into the cities is the hard piece. It's going to be the hardest piece.
Yeah, it's going
to be a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Vicky, your views on this?
Yeah, it's funny, Chris. I've literally just written down that this is rapidly becoming, and I think this is a point that I raised on one of our discussions weeks ago, that actually this is rapidly becoming a metropolitan issue versus a smaller conurbation or rural issue. Because, again, like many of us who live out of cities, I'm seeing businesses here completely reinventing themselves. And I was in one of our favorite little places, which announced it was reopening this week as a mixture of takeaway, delivery, coffee shop, art gallery, craft shop, etc., etc., etc. And talking to them about their experience over COVID. They closed for 2 weeks and then reopened, and they started with just 2 of them, the sisters, cooking for takeaways, and they were so successful that they brought their chef off furlough, and they've had to reduce the amount of actual physical cooking they do because they're so busy with everything else. Now that is a smaller business. Yesterday, by comparison, I went into Thame. It's the first day I've been back to our nearest sort of market town. And there's a couple of the restaurants there that have closed. And they're chain restaurants and they're casual dining restaurants. And I remember months ago, even 18 months ago, we were all talking about the number of casual dining restaurants that were already going bust, the likes of Jamie Oliver and these facilities on the high street. Partially because there were too many of them, and they were, and partially because of the rates, the rents, the gearing, the loans. And that's one thing, just conscious of time, that really does concern me going forward, looking at the differences between these smaller organizations who are the ones who can be flexible, who can get into honest discussions with their business owners, if indeed they aren't the owners themselves, who clearly haven't got the same constraints with landlords, with tenants, etc., etc. They're the ones who are able to reinvent themselves and to thrive. And it does make me wonder, and there's no answer to this, whether this isn't going to end up as a requirement for businesses to have to be restructured in completely different ways. I don't know, there's no answer to that, but it does look to me as if where we are going to struggle is with larger organizations who are very tied to the debts, to the rates, to the rents, and they have much less control over the ability to be innovative and flexible.
Look, I think you raised some really interesting points. I'm conscious of time too. I mean, one of the big debates we're finding is actually how boards restructure, yeah, and how they actually bring new talent to actually help them think differently.
Ways of thinking.
Which is going to be one of the things. Thank you. It's been a fascinating discussion yet again. So thank you today. There seems to be obviously quite a lot of questions. I think like all these forums, they raise more questions than they actually answer sometimes. But thank you so much. It's going to be a fascinating few weeks ahead. So I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Next week, same link.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.